Welcome to non-permit required confined space training for Janus Corporation. On rare occasions, Janus must work in confined spaces. There is regulatory requirement for confined space training. OSHA, Department of Industrial Relations, Title 8, CCR, Section 5158, Confined Space Operations. This rule prescribes minimum standards for preventing employee exposure to dangerous air contamination, oxygen enrichment, and oxygen deficiency in confined spaces. More importantly, we are concerned with your personal safety when working in a confined space. Confined space presents a unique work environment with special work requirements and preparation. Potential hazards of confined spaces include space configurations that could trap the entrant, could restrict entry or exit, or perhaps impede rescue from the work area. Atmospheric hazards, gases or vapors that are toxic or which replace oxygen within the workspace, and or physical hazards such as unstable footing, electrical equipment, machinery, falling objects, and the like. So what is a confined space? A confined space is any space that is large enough to be entered, has limited access for entry and exit, and is not designed for continuous employee occupation. Typically, our containments are not considered a confined space because they are designed for continuous occupancy. We work in them all day long. We are discussing non-permit required confined spaces. Permit required confined spaces will be discussed in a separate training. What's the difference between a non-permit required confined space and a permit required confined space? Permit required confined spaces are confined spaces with a potential to contain a hazardous atmosphere, or which have a material that has a potential for engulfing the entrant, or it contains inwardly converging walls or a floor that slopes downward and tapers to a smaller cross-section where an entrant could be trapped or asphyxiated, or it contains any other recognized serious safety health hazard. Remember, our containments do not typically qualify as a confined space, despite the fact they have limited access and contain a hazardous atmosphere, asbestos, lead, silica, etc. On rare occasions, when Janus has to work inside a manhole, within a tank, within a trench, or certain attics and basement areas, or similar areas, our containment will be set up inside a confined space. Any space labeled as a permit required confined space must be treated as a permit required confined space, even if it doesn't technically meet the definition of a confined space. Additional training is required for entry into a permit required confined space. The last slide included a trench as a confined space. Can a trench be a confined space? Yes, but only if 4 feet or deeper. These pictures are all bad situations. A trench through obviously soft soil, a worker in a trench without shoring, and a worker in a trench being actively excavated. The situation in the last picture received a $27,500 fine from OSHA. Can a trench be a permit required confined space? Yes, if it has a hazardous atmosphere or could collapse. What type of hazardous atmospheres can a trench contain? Elevated levels of dust, asbestos, lead, or other particulates in the air. Carbon monoxide from gas-operated tools and vehicles in or near the trench. Gases leaked from pipes or tanks in or near the trench. Janus will provide additional permit-required confined space training whenever we have a project where Janus employees must work within a permit-required confined space. This includes hands-on rescue training for anyone that may have to conduct confined space rescue activities. The following confined space entry team members must be present each time work inside a confined space is conducted: entrance, attendant, supervisor. Each of these 3 positions must be present at all times when entry into a confined space is conducted. Personnel may trade positions but cannot officially conduct the duties of 2 positions at the same time. Permit required confined spaces would add a rescue team to the entry team. Entrant responsibilities: know confined space hazards, exposure routes, signs, symptoms, and adverse health effects that could result from exposure, use of adequate PPE, use of proper entry equipment, follows proper entry procedures, performs assigned tasks, is alert to any prohibited condition, communicates with attendant, evacuates immediately if necessary or when ordered to by attendant. Entry into a confined space is when any part of the body, head, hand, foot, etc., passes through the entrance. Attendant responsibility: perform non-entry rescue or call for a rescue team when necessary. Know the hazards and potential hazards. Maintain count of authorized entrants in the space. Stay alert to possible behavioral changes of entrants. Monitor activities inside and outside the space to ensure that it is safe for entrants to remain in the area. Remain outside the confined space until relieved by another attendant, and prevents entry of unauthorized personnel. Communicates with the entrant or entrants, ordering evacuation if prohibited conditions arise. Supervisor responsibilities. Know the confined space hazards. Ensure that atmospheric testing and proper confined space preparations have been conducted prior to entry, if needed. Verifies that safe conditions have been attained. Ensures that acceptable entry conditions are maintained. Ensures that proper equipment is on site and operational. And make sure that the site is clear of unauthorized personnel. A warning. Of all people who die in confined spaces, 60% of them are people attempting to rescue someone from a confined space. Untrained rescuers are likely to succumb to the same hazard as the entrant they are trying to rescue, because multiple people often attempt rescue of an entrant. More rescuers die than entrants that were working in the confined space in the first place. Never attempt rescue of an entrant in a confined space unless you are properly trained. This training is not sufficient for entry rescue. Non-entry rescue, how the attendant can help rescue an entrant. Talking to the entrant to guide them out of the confined space. Using fall protection and cable or rope to pull the entrant from the confined space. Helping to lift or pull entrant from the confined space once the entrant has reached a hand or foot out from the entry. Calling 911 or calling a standby rescue team for help. Let's review a specific example, the epitome of confined space entry, confined space teamwork. Thank you for taking Janus Corporation's non-permit required confined space training. Please proceed to the quiz.